All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything Cultural Podcast. Today, me and Nick are 2024 Week 1 preview and prediction for North Dakota State and Colorado. 9.5-point line in favor of the Buffaloes. 59.5 is the total. 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN on Thursday night. Folsom Field in Boulder. Obviously, the site for this one. Looking at the North Dakota State offense, this is a very interesting unit, Nick. This is a team that, really prides themselves on physicality and being able to run the football. The Bison ran for nearly 238 yards per game last season. They get back 5 of their top 6 rushers. Their top running back does the part. They get back both quarterbacks, Cam Miller and Cole Payton, who had a combined 1,400 rushing and 13 touchdowns each. Barika Capinu and TK Marshall will take over as the top backs, 400 yards each and a combined 10 touchdowns last year. The thing about North Dakota State is they typically always have at least 6+ guys at or right there near the line of scrimmage. A lot of tight end usage, Joe Stoffel, Carson Williams, and then a fullback hybrid player, Truman Owermeyer. All really good blockers are back for them. What do you make of this rushing attack, Nick, going against a defense that was awful against the run last year? Obviously, we're going to talk about their defense, and they should be heavily improved. But this is not the greatest task for Colorado in Week 1 to, try and work out some of the kinks for those new guys they added against a very physical, grinding down type of rushing attack that has a lot of guys here.
This is a very strong rushing attack that North Dakota State has here. This is a big competition for them. They're jumping up to play an FBS team in Colorado. This is a strong rushing attack that I think can really produce a lot. They lose their top running back, which is certainly a tough loss, but they get back 5 of the next top 6 rushers right there, which is a really solid returning production. 238 yards per game last year is a really strong number. Cam Miller and Cole Payton are 2 really solid guys at quarterback who can run the ball very solid out of the backfield and great with their legs. TK Marshall is a very exciting back who returns to this team, hopefully going to find a way to pick up his workload this year. They have a ton of blockers. The line of scrimmage is very strong. They're very strong in the trenches. They build a lot of strong offensive line pieces, including some that get drafted to the NFL draft. They're very dominant in the trenches. They create nice running lanes, nice blocking for the running backs or the quarterback if they want to take the ball and run with it. Good opportunity to open the field and run against what is a very weak Colorado defensive line. They've made some good progress on it by adding some solid pieces out of the portal, which we're going to highlight, but it's still overall a weak unit that struggled last year. Things look good for the Bison if they're able to run the ball successfully against this Colorado defense.
They certainly had some balance as well. Cam Miller was the main passer when it came to throwing the ball, completed 71%, 19 touchdowns, 4 picks. 180 yards per game. Not very much attempt to push the ball downfield, though. It's not really on the scheme is why. They do lose their top 2 pass catchers. Get back the next 3 in Raja Nelson, who also ran through 300-plus yards along with 388 receiving. The aforementioned tight end Joe Stoffel, and then Braylon Henderson. You look at their offensive line, they lose 3 good starters up front. Gray Zabel is back after being a stand at a right tackle, though. 6'6", 305 pounds. That's kind of highlighting that offensive line. Averaging 32 minutes of possession last year, which, for example, the highest average in terms of possession time in FBS last season was 34. So they're certainly a team that likes to, hoard the football, control the clock. And that's something that's great, Nick, because when you have a passing attack led by Shedeur Sanders on the other side, you want to keep the ball out of his hands as much as possible. And this is a team that had a near 50% third down conversion rate. They're always in short yardage, it seems. They still had 38 points per game. So, that's a pretty deadly combination, Nick. When you can hoard the football, rarely you seem to get stopped on third down and still put up that many points per contest. That's very nasty, and obviously that's at the FCS level. But those are some interesting numbers, especially going to a game like this that is very winnable.
The possession stats are certainly strong for this team. They're able to grind and ground and pound you on the ground with multiple different options to run the ball. They have a really strong offensive line that, despite losing 3 starters, Gray Zabel is a really strong piece at right tackle. I like his frame, like his hands, good footwork as well, as he's going to try and lead the way for this offensive line on that right side. They're very strong on third down, a lot of nice third down conversion rate. 50-50 rate right there is a very strong rate. They're good in the red zone as well, which is really strong for this offense. They score a lot of points in the red zone. They're very efficient in the red zone, which is certainly helpful. I do like what they return at tight end, bringing back their solid tight end pieces. Henderson's a really solid tight end that they bring back who can be an impactful player on the offensive line, while Joe Stoffel as well is a really good tight end who can be used in blocking different setups there. I do think the passing attack is good enough. I think it's serviceable for who they're playing right now. I think they're going to try and run the ball an absolute ton against this team because, like you're alluding to, you don't really want to give Shedeur Sanders the opportunity to kind of create things on his own with his elite arm and elite ability to throw downfield. So keep the ball for yourself, run the ball a whole lot, chew a ton of clock, maintain a strong time of possession, and you can walk out of there with an upset.
This offense was top 5 of the top 10 in tons of categories in the FCS last year. That includes the number 1 ranked red zone offense. They had 10 more scores than the second ranked team. This is a great unit here. I certainly wonder what this passing attack will accomplish. If they're needed late in the game, Nick, I certainly think that's a big concern there, because they just don't seem to probably have the athletes to be able to, consistently win if they're in, second and third and long late in the game trying to make plays. So that's the one concern certainly in this matchup. Moving to the Colorado offense, obviously this is, the Hollywood lights are going to be shining bright on this unit this season. Shedeur Sanders coming off a phenomenal season. Talks of him potentially being in line to go number 1 overall next season, or in next year's draft, that is. 69% completion rate, 3,200 yards, 27 scores, and 3 picks for him. A guy who protected the ball tremendously. In terms of yards per attempt, they certainly tried to offset what was a poor rushing attack by, throwing a lot of quick game and a lot of underneath stuff. This is a great quarterback that has an even better receiving group, Nick. Obviously, Travis Hunter, an incredible athlete. Jimmy Horn had, 567 yards and 6 scores, which was a team high last year. They pick up Will Shepard and LeJonte Wester, 2 guys who are very good pass catchers. Wester had over 100 receptions last year. Shepard, playing for Vanderbilt, certainly didn't have the greatest of production, but he's certainly a guy that we were always talking about, a highly talented pass catcher. They're very deep at receiver, Nick. Sanders is obviously going to probably put on a bit of a show through the air. What do you make of this matchup they have here? And we'll talk about the, Bison defense later, but I think this is a premier matchup for this passing attack to really showcase their abilities.
I will concede that this is a good matchup for Colorado here. I think the secondary for North Dakota State's a bit weak on that defensive side of the ball. I think this is a really strong passing attack they have. Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn are 2 really great players that are returning. They combined for 11 touchdowns last year. Hunter had 12.6 yards per grab and 721 total yards of receiving yards. Solid numbers from him in his first season. Splitting time between defense and offense is still extremely impressive. Will Shepard's a great add from Vanderbilt, SEC experience. Definitely did not live up to our expectations last year. Had a bit of a down season, but still a really strong player, a really good guy that has SEC experience, which is very valuable in a team like this. They also bring in another solid piece in LeJonte Wester, who I think is a solid add. Sam Hart at tight end as well is hoping to be involved in this offense and get some targets from Shedeur Sanders. This team does not have a rushing attack at all, really, so they're going to have to air the ball out here. They're going to have to absolutely try and torch this North Dakota State team through the air. Sanders is a really accurate quarterback. Nearly 70% comp rate is very impressive. He does take a lot of sacks, though, which could be the key. Is can Colorado or North Dakota State, that is, find a way to get sacks against Shedeur, get in the pocket, rough him up, knock him down a little bit, throw off his tempo. I think that's certainly a key to success if they can find a way to get in the backfield and throw him off his game. A very strong passer, a highly ranked prospect with a highly ranked elite wide receiving group could pose to be a good recipe.
Yeah, you certainly look at this running back room. They lost their top 4 rushers from a season ago, which was very strange considering there's a lot of playing time up for grabs. Dalton Hayden arrives from Ohio State. He's a pretty good runner. Isaiah Augustive from Arkansas. You have a couple of freshmen, led by Michael Welsh in there, and then a veteran returning in Charlie Arfadal. So this is a backfield that really just seems to have limited depth after posting the worst mark in FBS last year, 68.9 rushing yards per game. And obviously that success will come down to what this offensive line looks like. You pick up a 5-star true freshman at left tackle in Jordan Seaton. You also have some other guys like Tyler Johnson, Justin Mayers, Khalil Benson, Wyatt Huemel. So there's obviously, a lot going on with this offensive line. I certainly think they're still undersized at the center position. I think on the interior, they've certainly boosted things up. Seaton will likely be a phenomenal player, but we've seen a lot of true freshmen struggle, in college football when they're getting the start at left tackle over the past couple of seasons. Ultimately, what do you think this offensive line will accomplish, Nick? Because we're still not really sure who the starting 5 will be, but I think if Mayers and Johnson are in there at guard, Tyler Brown even, I think they're certainly going to be much better there, but center still is a bit of an undersized in a weak area for them, so it might hold them back a great deal.
A young and inexperienced offensive line certainly worries me against a veteran defensive line coming over from North Dakota State. I think Jordan Seaton could be a really strong and incredible player. for Colorado, but first career game at left tackle, that's certainly a high risk. Hank Zilaski at center as well, a younger player as a sophomore. Justin Mayers was a good add out of the portal. Tyler Johnson was as well. Will both of them start at guard? Will Tyler Brown, who was here last year, get the start at guard? I don't really know what they're going to look to go with. Is Khalil Benson the guy at right tackle? Or are they going to put in maybe Wyatt Hummel, or maybe kick Tyler Johnson out to right tackle potentially? So there's a lot of different vulnerabilities right now that we could see with this offensive line. We don't really seem to know exactly what their plan is, or Dion's plan, that is. What is he going to do? What is Coach Sanders going to do early on in this game? Is he going to plug in some different pieces? We're going to have to see when they go out on the field. I worry about this offensive line. I'm not entirely sure how strong it's going to hold up, and the rushing attack is really non-existent, so I don't know how much of an impact it's going to have in this game.
That leads you to the matchup they have with the Bison defense, a unit that had 39 sacks last season. They lose a great player in Jake Kava, but return an abundance of guys that generated negative plays last season. Cody Huseman, Eli Mostert, they're the top interior defensive linemen, and they're back. His brother Will Mostert was also pretty good. To get defensive end Dylan Hendricks, who was a phenomenal player versus the run. I thought he was very good as a pass rusher as well. One thing I noticed about this defensive line is they're just incredibly deep. I'm just going to stop naming guys because they have a lot of guys who got a lot of reps last season and played quite sound all around. They allowed about 116 rushing yards per game. Against the FCS, obviously the numbers are going to be a bit skewed. They did give up 3 games of 200-plus rushing, though. Again, now they face that offensive line that was horrid last season, but does undergo that great reconstruction. The run game, it's likely not going to be something that's going to play in the Colorado's favor in this game. So obviously looking for the Buffaloes to create for a lack of production on the ground is something they got to be aware of. Screens with the running backs, tunnel screens with the wide receivers. Certainly this defensive line, they have to be athletic in space, Nick, because even if you're facing a rushing attack that wasn't very good, you're still going to be needed on every single down, and I think this defensive line is going to be capable of doing so.
I think this defensive line will be capable of doing so. I think they'll be able to get in the backfield, get a few sacks on Sanders, make him a little uncomfortable, make him make a mistake or two, and capitalize on it. It's a very physical unit that had 39 sacks last year, really strong number. They have a lot of physical guys. They return extremely amount of players, deep group with a lot of reps to go around, a lot of solid guys. Top 2 linebackers come back. I think Logan Kopp is a really fun, really strong player that's very good against the run, a nice quarterback of that defense, a guy that knows what he's doing and can certainly lay out a hit. I like what this defensive line has. I think it's a very strong unit. I think they're going to overpower an offensive line that has a lot of question marks for Colorado, which is my key to the game, is can the Bison's defensive line absolutely overpower the Colorado offensive line? And I think they can, and that will lead them to a very strong performance up there in Boulder. I like them to get a couple sacks, make Sanders uncomfortable, force a mistake or two, potentially a pick or a fumble, and put themselves in a great position.
Now, the biggest concern I have with this defense is the secondary, and it's a good unit for the level of competition they face. 186 yards per game allowed. They lose their top cornerback. They return a starter, Marcus Shepard. Jaquise Alexander steps into a starting role after playing a good bit last year, not being all that splendid himself. Both safeties are back in Sam Jung and Cole Wisnowski, who was an elite player for them in the back end last year. So this is a veteran group here. But the concern I have is they've yet to face skill like this. Meaning this pass rush is obviously going to have a tall task ahead, like you alluded to. They're going to have to make them uncomfortable to help out this secondary. A couple years ago, Wake Forest, they played Army, for example, and I was like, hammer, for fantasy or prop purposes wise, I said, hammer every single, Sam Hartman and wide receiver prop you can, because they're going to torch them, because they don't practice against anything like this at all, that being Army. And they got 70 points dropped on them, Nick. The passing attack flat out dominated them like I've never seen before. I don't think it's going to happen quite to this extent, but they certainly do not practice against anything like this. A juggernaut of a wide receiver group and an elite first-round talent at quarterback. That's where the concern comes for me. These are good players. This is a good secondary, but for their level of competition, Nick. So I'm very worried about how they will play in this contest, where I think, 350 yards, 3 to 4 touchdowns is something that's certainly going to be on the table and very realistic.
This is something that does worry me. If I have to highlight one issue that I am concerned about with this defense, is the secondary. Can they compete with this increased level of talent, increased level of production potentially against them? I think defensive line's going to have to do a lot of work to offset that. I do think Sanders will get a 1 or 2 huge chunk plays, potentially a long touchdown pass to get themselves and get the momentum going and fire this team up there in Boulder. I do think that's certainly possible with the way that the secondary is. They just never really face a team like this. I don't think it's going to be the biggest deal in the world. I still think they'll be able to figure out and offset it by a strong defensive line performance, but that is concerning me somewhat, because if Shadur Sanders has time to create and hit his wide receiving targets, it could be tough for the secondary to keep up. They've never really seen anything like this.
Now, moving to the Buffalo's defense, obviously a unit that was just awful last season. That was last season, though. We're going to put it behind them. A new staff is in order, a lot of new players as well. 110th in FBS against the run, though. They were very undersized and struggled to get penetration. Now, this is a heavily revamped unit. BJ Green, Chidozie Nwankwo, Rayan Buell, Dayon Hayes. Some real standouts here. Math would say they're going to be much better against the run. They need to get help in the middle of their defense, though, as it's less desirable. I think Trevor Woods will be a good asset. Significantly struggled in his, move from safety down the linebacker. He's a good player, Nick. I think he'll figure it out. Levante Bentley, on the other hand, wasn't very good. Linebacking group was probably one that was probably the least attentive in this offseason. They did add some guys, though, certainly Jalen Wester probably being the most notable. But no one here that I think is going to be an immediate impact performer. It's really going to change things around. So I think this run defense, they're going to be better, right? But how much better they'll be? Again, this is not the ideal matchup to try and break things in, Nick, in week one against a great physical rushing attack that has tight ends. They'll go toe-to-toe with you, and they don't care what the name on your jersey is or what conference you play in. These boys will get after it, and if this defensive line is not well in tune, they'll certainly have some big-time struggles.
This is a very tough matchup for a new-look defensive line here that returns one starter in Shane Cokes at defensive tackle, who was good for them last year, but not good enough with 29 total tackles. They bring in BJ Green coming off the edge, who I think was a really solid add, who could be involved with this previously at Arizona State, a highly ranked player out of the portal that ended up going to Colorado. They bring in Dayon Hayes as well, who is a guy that's got experience in college football, was playing at Pittsburgh for quite some time. He's hoping to be an impactful player. They got to find a way to get in the backfield. They got to find a way to disrupt this rushing attack, because if North Dakota State has the time in the world to absolutely run all over them, they're going to use up that clock and do so. Got to find a way to play strong defense and prevent North Dakota State from really bullying you on the defensive line. I think that offensive line for North Dakota State is a very physical unit that is capable of doing that.
I think we see a big jump this year against the run, but this matchup, I think you're still in line to give up about 200 yards, which isn't awful if it's on 50-plus carries. That's a pretty good margin, certainly a lot better than last season. I think I'm certainly worried about the linebackers more than the offensive line, which obviously goes hand in hand in defending the run. So that's something you certainly want to watch in that matchup, and it's something we're all going to be interested in seeing. And, of course, the secondary is talented. Scheming needs to be better, and obviously these tight ends, you don't want to let them get loose because they can sneak out behind you. And I think that's something, if this run game is clicking, Nick, is a big concern for Colorado, where discipline last year and too much free space was available for the opponent. And with this scheme, they're going to run wheel routes out of nowhere with these tight ends. 2 or 3 of them in line. One of them is going to go downfield, and he's probably going to be wide open. That's a fear I really have for Colorado. If they're not coached up better, the scheme isn't better. Obviously, Travis Hunter's a tremendous corner. Preston Hodge was a phenomenal add. DJ McKinney had a great season last year. He transfers in. Cameron Selman Craig and Shiloh Sanders, a veteran safety group. I think this is a very good secondary, but the scheming has to be tailored around these guys' skills. You didn't see it last season, Nick. And now Sean Livingston arrives as the defensive coordinator, so you're going to try and implant a new one. What is your expectation for the secondary? Might not be needed too much, but the concern I alluded to is something you have to be aware of more than just a downfield passing attack on every play.
This linebacking core and secondary has a lot of work to do. Trevor Woods and Levante Bentley have to be better this year. They were not good enough last year at linebackers, both of them. Bentley was solid, though. He was 68 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. Got to be better. As for the secondary, I think the Preston Hodge and DJ McKinney add are 2 really strong adds. Travis Hunter obviously returns. I believe he's a very strong defensive player. That's his best position. I really want to see what he continues to look like this year. Shiloh Sanders had a really good season last year. Salman Craig as well returns, who had a decent season last year. Sanders led the team in tackles with 70 total tackles, while Hunter was really solid as well with 3 picks and 5 pass breakups. I do worry about the secondary getting exposed a little bit, but I don't think it's the biggest issue in the world, as I do expect North Dakota State just to run the ball a whole lot and probably not get too fancy with it, but that is something to consider. The new scheme is definitely interesting. They made a transition, brought in a new defensive coordinator after last year's, disastrous start. They're going to play this kind of multiple 4-2-5 here, change it up a little bit. I like what this scheme could do potentially in the future. I just don't know how well it's going to be effective this first game of the season, although I do think over time it could be a nice transitional scheme for this Colorado defense.
No, looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons, Shitter's obviously going to get the big edge at quarterback, even though for North Dakota State they have 2 guys that were very productive last year in their respective scheme. Running back, pretty obvious there. Wide receiver as well, not much of a competition. And I think in the trenches, these are certainly debatable because Colorado has revamped them so well. But I'm going to go with the proven units. And that's for the Bison. Obviously, the defensive line is highly talented now for the Buffaloes. Certainly more talented than North Dakota State, but in terms of discipline and depth and, consistent size, I guess you could say, certainly got to give the Bison the edge there. Linebacker as well. And then in the secondary, even though the Bison are probably collectively a better group. I think it's more talented for the Buffaloes, and I think they'll be better in this respective contest, and I think their matchup is obviously a lot easier. So I'm going to give them the edge there. Any disagreements with this one here, Nick? Or you think it's pretty clear, cut and dry across the board?
Makes a lot of sense to me. I think this is a very balanced list by you. I think it's a fair tail of the tape. I do think the quarterback obviously is a major edge for Colorado, as is the secondary. The wide receiver room is also incredible. But the other four, I think, make a lot of sense for North Dakota State, and I think it's going to be tough for Colorado fans to try and argue the difference. Maybe linebacker, but I really disagree with that. I think running back, offensive line, and defensive line are all really strong. I think linebacker is very strong for North Dakota State as well. I think this is a very fair tail of the tape and a very fair team comparison.
And looking at the final thoughts and the prediction. Looking at the keys to the game, for North Dakota State, control clock, find pressure on Shadur when it matters most. And for the Buffaloes, air it out early and often. And don't get overwhelmed by that Bison physicality. A lot of people are going to offer opinions on this game, Nick. It's going to be, a highly touted contest. I think it's going to be a close one. I think we have the best preview in America, though, when it comes to this game, because we're the ones sitting down and breaking down both these teams completely in depth, while everyone's just going to lean on, past physics, I guess you could say, for North Dakota State, a team that's 9-4 all-time against the FBS teams. They won 6 in a row before losing to Arizona by only 3 points in 2022. The matchup before that, they went on the road, beat a 13th-ranked Iowa team in 2016. So we barely saw them as of late against FBS opponents, and people are just going to read stats off like that, and I certainly get it. It's in this team's culture. This is something that means a lot to this program. This is a game that will not be taken lightly one bit. But I think at the end of the day, we're the ones that are sitting here going deep into these, and I think there's going to be very accurate at the end of the day. That's going to be a close game. You have the upset. I don't, just because I think the Colorado passing game will be a major difference maker. The secondary is just not going to be prepared for. Don't think they get annihilated by any means. I think they'll allow some big plays, and some critical third downs will be converted by Shadur. Bison will cover because I think the run game will be very good, and the defense will also find plenty of stops in a closely contested contest. Won't pull the trigger on an upset. I'm not as bold as you, Nick, but I certainly wouldn't be shocked one bit at the end of the day if the team in green's walking off in victory.
I'm pulling the trigger on the upset simply for one big thing that I look at, and it's something you mentioned in your previous statement, is culture, right? The culture at North Dakota State, that's a winning culture. They know they've changed coaches recently, haven't won a national title in a couple of years, but this is a dominant program that's racked up national titles over and over again at the FCS level, have beaten FBS teams over and over again, including a top 25 team in Iowa, like you alluded to. They have won a national championship in the last couple of years. South Dakota State has had a really nice run, but this is still a team that pumps out, highly rated prospects that get drafted in NFL draft, guys that are extremely talented for their level. And they have a team of players that commit and build in. Meanwhile, while you have the absolute opposite in Boulder, Colorado, a team of players who are just there for NIL, just there for flash, and really not committed to building a sustainable future. It's a complete mess at Colorado, in my opinion. I think this season is going to go very difficultly for the Colorado Buffalo. I don't think they're going to have any success at all this season. It's going to be a complete disaster for Sanders and company up there. And I think it starts with a bad loss on week 1, Thursday night, primetime national television against an FCS team. I think North Dakota State has what it takes to run the ball, control the clock, ground and pound, and they have a very dominant defensive line that I think will overpower a patchwork, new look offensive line. And there's a lot of guys getting new experiences, including a true freshman playing his first game. They'll be able to make Sanders uncomfortable, make him make a few mistakes, a pick, a fumble potentially, sack him a few times, throw off his game. It's going to be close. I don't think North Dakota State runs away with it, but I think they'll get a nice momentum swing towards the end of the game and close out a huge upset in the grand scheme of things. I like what this Bison's team can do. I think this North Dakota State team is a really strong, physical team, and that's a tough matchup for Colorado.
Yeah, a team that has played plenty of tough physical contests at the FCS level. Obviously lower competition, but there's still a lot of ranked teams that do play very hard, and it means a lot to those programs to play those games. So obviously that's something. Even though they haven't won a national championship in 2 years, they've lost to close games to great teams. They've blown out great teams as well. So North Dakota State certainly going to be in this contest. Bold prediction from Nick. It's going to be a great game regardless. I'm glad that it's on Thursday night, Nick. I'm so happy that they decided to do that, because this is going to give both of these programs an opportunity to shine, and they're not going to have that taken away by playing on a Saturday in week 1 where there's a bunch of monster contests going on. Love the spotlight they're getting here.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to locking in on this one. They get the the national spotlight. Everyone's going to be watching this game. A must-watch TV, in my opinion. A lot of storylines to look after here. I think this is a game where a lot of people can learn a lot about the direction of Colorado, as well as be reminded of the dominance of North Dakota State. I'm very excited for what will be a very strong and fun game on Thursday night.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.